Turning points change the course of our lives, whether it's a big decision, overcoming an obstacle or tragedy, or taking a leap of faith. These stories of inspiration and resilience are what Turning Point is all about. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Turning Point. I'm your host, Priya Sam, and this week I have the pleasure of speaking with Jennie Painter. Jennie is a counselor who works in the adoption space. She has focused much of her career on researching and promoting the benefits of open adoption for birth parents, adoptive families, and most importantly, the children involved. Jennie's turning point came when she was a teacher in the United States, and we're going to hear more about that shortly. Welcome to Turning Point, Jennie.
Thank you, Priya. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's great
And
to have
also
you.
to have the opportunity to talk about my favorite subject, adoption.
I'm so glad that you agreed to do this interview because as I was looking through the notes from your pre-interview, I realized how little I know about this topic. I just think it's such an interesting area. So I'm really glad we get to talk about it today.
Well, thank you.
I mentioned in the introduction that before your counseling career, you were a teacher. So what led you to pursue a career in education?
Well, one of the things that has really helped me in my career is to realize that you have to have plan A, but you also have to have plan B and maybe even plan C. So I didn't start out thinking I wanted to be a teacher. In fact, I didn't want to be a teacher because my mother was a teacher. And you know, when you're 18 or 19, you never want to do what your mother does, right? So all my childhood and adolescence, I wanted to be a veterinarian. That was it. And I lived in New York State at that time. And I planned to go to Cornell and become a vet, although that was back in 1963. And at that time, vet schools were primarily for men. It was seen as a male occupation. And Cornell, I think it only admitted 3 women in their history in the vet school. So I applied, but I didn't get in. And I was devastated. And I really didn't care, tell you the truth. I knew I was going to go to university, but, I didn't know what I wanted to be. So I went and graduated and then realized I needed to have a job. And I was an English major, so talking about books at a cocktail party doesn't pay well. So I thought, well, what will I be? And the advice I got, Jennie, you need to get real and pick an occupation that's suitable for a woman. So I thought, oh, well, I'll pick teaching. So I did. Went into it very nonchalant, but I ended up loving it. I loved it. And, uh, and I taught for about 10 years. The last 2 years, I became head of a very large English department. But I was beginning to realize that um, I had taught that particular English curriculum for 10 years, and I was getting a little bored. And what I noticed is that the students would come after school or lunch and they'd want to tell me about some of their personal challenges. And I enjoyed listening to them, and I felt like I helped them because high school can be difficult. And, um, and then I got thinking, I should be a counselor. But you start with an idea or sort of a dream, and then you still have to go to work and pay the bills and all that stuff. And so you just think about it. But then I remarried and came to Canada, and I thought that was a great time to make a change. If I'm making a big change like moving to another country, you might as well make an occupational change. So I did. And I started, it took me a few years to get this together, but I finally enrolled at Carleton University in the Masters of Social Work program. And so for about 2 years, I did that.
So this is a huge change. Like you said, you have been a teacher for 10 years. And it's so interesting how this kind of natural evolution happened where you realized that the part of your job you were really enjoying was basically being a counselor in a non-official
Yeah.
capacity and helping your students with their personal issues. So this you mentioned going back to school, but obviously this is like a full re-education, I would guess. So what exactly did that look like for you?
Um, well, Priya, it was hard. First of all, I lived in Kingston, and Carleton is in Ottawa, 2.5 hours away. And my husband was employed, and we had three children at various schools, one a baby. And he didn't want to move the whole family. So what we worked out is I'd get up early Monday morning, go to Ottawa, stay there until Thursday afternoon, and come home. And I stayed at a bed and breakfast during the week. And so that my husband, that meant he had to support me or this wouldn't work because we had a 14-year-old, we had a 5-year-old, and we had a baby that was 3 months.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That, I mean,
So
just managing that, just managing three kids is a full-time job and a more than a full-time job um,
absolutely,
on its own. So yeah, wow.
absolutely. And this was slightly before there were a lot of Mr. Moms, or you saw a lot of. It was the days before you saw dads wheeling baby carriages. So um, when we talked about this, um, people were when we told them what we were doing, people were silent. I took that as a negative response, but it was hard, and it was certainly hard for my husband because being home alone with three kids and those different age groups, you see, they're not all one. You got a teenager, you got one going to kindergarten, and you got a baby. So um, when I look back at it, it was a wonderful time for me to get away, but it wasn't so wonderful for my husband. He really, uh, he, he paid the price. And then I would come home on Thursday evening and he'd be exhausted and I would take over. So I couldn't study then. So that meant when I was at Carleton, I studied, studied, studied. And when I came home, I was mom. But when you leave your children for a chunk of time like that, there are changes. And one of the things that was upsetting for me was that I was no longer seen as the primary parent. And so I'd come home and uh, Mike would Mike was always climbing trees and he fell out of a tree and hurt his knee. He didn't come rushing to me. He went to his dad.
Uh,
And so I had lost my role as not mom but primary parent. And that was hard for me, to tell you the truth.
Of course, that would be hard. And to know that, I mean, in your plans and in your decision to make this, I'm sure you were thinking about like how this would be good for not just you, but for your family, of course, once you finished and you were able to pursue this career that you were really passionate about. But it sounds like you and your family had to make a lot of sacrifices along the way.
Hmm. Yes, and I've never dared ask my children what impact that had on them, but I think I'm brave enough now because they're all grown up. I might just ask them at some point. But I think they just thought it was normal.
Yeah.
It was just sort of normal. Mom
Yeah.
goes away for a few days and comes back.
So how long did you have to do that in order to finish your degree?
It was 18 months. Fortunately, Carleton let me take a few courses at Queen's, so I could, which is here in Kingston, and I could transfer them. So that was good. But it was 18 months, and yeah,
Yeah, that's like a long time to be juggling so much. So it must have been very exciting for you when you finally graduated and finished the program.
It was. It was. And the whole family came to the graduation, and I think they were as happy as I was because it was all done. It was all done.
Yeah. So of course, after graduation, then the next step after you get to celebrate and mark the big occasion with your family, you have to find a job in this world. So how did that go for you? And how did you end up in the adoption space?
Well, again, that's a turning point, and it's not a planned turning point. It's like a happening or I don't know, a lucky point in my life. So I've always been interested in health and medicine, thus the vet. And then I thought, oh well, I'm going to be a social worker, and I'm going to work in a rehab unit and be a family therapist there. And I did. And When I was still in graduate school, I was thinking I'd write my thesis on phantom pain because I worked with a lot of amputees, and so I thought, well, I'll do that. And I was halfway through my thesis, and a friend of mine called me up and said, Jenny, there's an adoption licensee in Toronto looking for somebody in Kingston to do birth parent counseling. And would you be interested? And since my charge cards were maxed out, I was very interested. And I said, sure, I'll do it. Priya, I had no idea about how to do birth parent counseling or about adoption. Like I was green, but willing. So I had a very good mentor who's a social worker in Toronto, Patricia um, Convery, and she basically um, took me through the process. And I worked with a young woman, uh, bright red hair. I still remember her hair, a wonderful sense of humor, although she was in a difficult situation. And she was from Newfoundland, and she was wonderful. And she taught me more about adoption than anyone, and uh, really spent the time sharing with me how she felt and what she didn't like about the process, what she needed from me. She was wonderful. And so when I finished working with her, I was supposed to go back and finish this thesis on phantom pain, and I tore it up. I
Wow.
had no more interest. Tore it up.
So this
Uh,
experience really changed the course of what you wanted to do with your education and also your with your thesis.
and so my thesis, I had to have a thesis, so I compared. I had found 50 birth parents, different ages, in Ontario, who were willing to share information, and I compared their mental and physical health because 25 of them had gone through CAS and a closed adoption, Children's Aid Society, and 25 of them had gone through a more open process through private adoption. And I found some interesting things. One thing I found about the birth parents who've gone through the closed adoption, public adoption, that 43% of them were not able to have another baby. Tried, no baby. And my research, there was a research project out of Australia. They came in higher with 45%. So that's one of the, I don't know if you'd call it a side effect, but that's one of the things that can happen to women that go through an adoption and place a baby. It's so traumatic that in their future they try to have another baby and they can't. Unexplained infertility.
I had no idea. I've never heard that before. So, and those are pretty high percentages from,
Almost 50, almost half.
huh.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's what trauma can do to you. And when you look at women around the world, one of the main functions and the main things that make us feel good about ourselves is if we do have children is how we parent. And so, deciding to not parent your baby is, especially when I started out, was not well thought of. You know. It automatically made these women feel like they were failures.
It sounds like for those women, the birth mothers, there was a lot of almost like shame around the situation, just given the way they were treated.
Absolutely. Well, again, this was back in the early 1980s when I first started that first counseling session. And in some of the maternity homes, what they'd have the women do is if they went outside, they'd give them wedding rings to wear. So they were obviously pregnant, but now it looked like they were married and pregnant, right?
Right.
And then also when they would go into the hospital, some of them were not allowed to see their baby. Uh, some of them weren't even told whether the baby was live or dead, or boy or girl. It was sort of like you give birth to this baby and then you leave, and you were sort of told to forget. No woman who gives birth to a baby is going to forget a baby.
No,
Mm. And the other thing that was sort of uh, a silent condemnation of what they did, they were seen as being selfish, uncaring, immature. Well, when you're truly able to do something for somebody else at your own expense, I don't see that as selfish or immature or uncaring. Not at all.
absolutely. And it must have been, I mean, as you're kind of describing all of this, I mean, no wonder so many of them dealt with so much trauma after going through this. It sounds like it could also feel really isolating, and probably at that time, given the stigma around their situations, they wouldn't have had a lot of access to people they could talk to, I would guess, as well.
That's absolutely true, Priya. And some of the stories are amazing. Um, for example, um, some of the younger women that still lived with their parents didn't tell their parents they were pregnant. And- I know. And you would say, well, didn't they notice? And so when you're pregnant and you're trying to hide it, I think you purposely keep that, what do they call that, core in tight, right? And then you wear the sweatshirts that are baggy and bulky and so forth. So they became very good at hiding it. And then I'd say to them, well, what happened when you went into labor? Well, um, they would just leave, and then when they came back, the next day they would, or they'd call their mother or father and say, "Oh, I'm at my girlfriend's house. I'm going to stay a day. I'll be back," and then they come back home.
What? And their parents would never. I'm so shocked. So sorry. So and then their parents would just have no idea. They would never. So
Never
they would
knew.
have in the background been going through this process of deciding to put their baby up for adoption and kind of disappear to a friend's house for a couple of days when they were giving birth.
Correct.
Oh my gosh.
Correct. And you think of the care that we give a birthing mother when she's married and comes home. We provide food. It's hard to sit, so you get the cushions, and you're tired. So, but I remember this one girl, 16, and her job was to do the dishes. And a day after she gave birth, she was doing the family dishes, and carrying on. She wanted to carry on as normal so nobody would know. She did.
And at that time, I were most adoptions. I know you mentioned during your research you spoke to half of the people you spoke to had closed adoptions and half were part of open adoptions. At that time, was it primarily closed adoptions?
Yes.
Or yeah,
Yes.
is that the right terminology, or would you say private adoptions?
There's two classifications. There's private, which is where you go through a private adoption licensee. Then there's public adoption where you go through the Children's Aid Society. And then there are different kinds of adoption: open, semi open, and closed.
Got it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So at the time, most of them were closed adoptions. And then
Mm-hmm.
I would guess a mix of private and public as well.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Mainly in private adoption, doctors would refer one of their clients to a licensee, and nobody advertised. There's no advertising, so it set up a privileged system. So private adoption, you got counseling and I would say more time with your licensee because the doctor had referred you. And in public adoption, you're in the public arena.
Yeah.
Hmm.
What else did you learn from your research? You mentioned those increased infertility rates among birth
Hmm.
mothers.
Hmm. Well, um, and this is information that was coming to me, but I didn't put it together. I just did my job and didn't really put everything together. But over the years, suddenly I realized because several of the birth parents have kept in touch with me over the years, and now they have children the age they were when they came to work with me, and so I've been very fortunate to know about their lives and what they did with it, and how adoption affected them. And what I found out is that um, placing a baby for adoption, whether it's open or closed, doesn't matter, is traumatic. And it affects a woman mentally, emotionally, and physically. And many of these women continue to have problems that are very similar to one another. There's patterns. So, having another child is difficult. Unexplained infertility. If they do get pregnant and have another child, mm, high anxiety, afraid they're going to lose the child. Mm, you know, um, they can become hover mothers. Um, uh, and then it's interesting. Uh, some of the women I've uh, kept in contact with, um, I would say a mild form of depression, anxiety, lifelong. And then what's interesting is some of the physical pains are the same: low back pain, headaches, hmm and
That's
gynae problems. And they go to their doctor and they have the blood tests and they have the x-rays and all this, and it comes back that no, you're fine. There's nothing to be noted. And I was going to write the name of this professor down, but I forgot to do it. But there's a professor in Nova Scotia, Halifax, and he has studied um, how trauma affects someone's health, physical health, and how if it's not dealt with, that can that can go on for a long time, where they report having medical problems, but when the tests are done, they they come back fine. So they can't explain what happens. So he, in this project he would be referred these people, and then he'd counsel them around trauma in their life. And for many of them, their health improved. And so I'm looking at all these birth moms who are reporting the same kind of symptoms that he's noted in his research. And I'm thinking counseling is so important, so important, and both before and after. Not forever, but it needs to be done, and that needs to be improved in our system today.
You have spent a lot of your career working to help improve the system, and especially when it comes to how birth parents are treated, and also to really supporting open adoption. So, what did you learn over the course of your career about the impact of open adoptions?
Um, So, first of all, open adoption was not widely embraced initially. And I want to tell you a little story because I find this is funny now. Um, I was starting to do adoption work at the same time working in rehab, and I wasn't. I was getting very frustrated with how adoption was done, and at one point thought, no, I don't. This is making me feel uncomfortable. I don't like what I'm doing with to women, and so and then for some reason, I picked up this magazine and it had a little tiny ad about open adoption training in San Antonio, Texas. And I read it and I rushed home and I said to my husband, Dennis, we're going to San Antonio. Well, Dennis was I would describe him as a liberal Canadian, and going to Texas was not what he wanted to do. But I dragged him. And we went and we learned about this wonderful thing, this kind of family formation called open adoption. So I'm all excited about this. And, I start creating a process where yeah, I'd become a licensee at that point where we could do it. And the government, that the adoption unit, asked me to come and do a speech on open adoption. And this is in front of all the adoption workers in Ontario, yeah, private and public. So anyhow, it's I was supposed to speak in the afternoon, and the morning came and went, and we were having a lunch break, and I went out in the foyer, and I there was a group of women, and they were laughing, and one of them said, "Have you ever heard of that lady Jennie Painter, and that open adoption thing she's doing?" And they all poo pooed it, and then this one lady said, which I thought was funny, she's so open minded, her brains have fallen out.
Oh, oh my gosh. And you heard all of this? That must have
Yes,
been
yes.
awful right before your
And I was
talk.
drinking coffee, and I thought it was funny actually. And I spit the coffee out because I was, how that happens when you laugh and are drinking. And the one lady that had said it turned to me and she says, "Oh, I see you're in agreement with us." And I said, "Well, not really." I said, "I'd like to introduce myself as Jenny Painter."
Good for you. Oh my gosh.
Oh, yeah.
I would have loved to see their faces.
And so I noticed in the afternoon when I was talking, they sat at a very far table, as far away from me as they could get.
Oh, that is funny. So it
Yeah.
sounds like this was kind of a newer concept at that time for a
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
people who worked in the field.
Nobody knew of it, doing it, nothing. And so I got to be known as the adoption lady. I don't know what they call me now, but that's what they call me then. And so what have I learned about adoption, about open adoption? Well, it's not something that initially birth parents or adoptive parents want to go into. They're afraid of it. Birth parents will say something to me like, "Well, Jenny, I came to you so you could help me place my baby for adoption. I didn't come here to adopt a family. Uh, you know, what is this?" Um, and and that's what it is. So, initially it's like, I've got enough to handle, and I said, "Yeah, fine. I'm just telling you what, it's educating you about options. No, you know." And so the adoptive parents come in, and they've got a lot of fears. They're Many of them have gone through several infertility tests, and uh, painful, unpleasant, disappointing. And so then when you tell them, "Well, I want you to share your baby with the birth mother," they're frightened. They think they say, "Oh, it makes me feel like a babysitter. I'm never going to be a mother or father, just a babysitter." And that's not true. You spend 48 hours with a baby, you're not going to feel like a babysitter. You're going to feel like a genuine parent, stressed and tired. Um, but they don't know that, you know? They don't know that. And then they're worried that if they send pictures to the birth mother and the baby looks really cute, the birth mother's going to want the baby back. And if they send pictures of the baby when he's looking sad or covered in chocolate cake or whatever, then they're worried that the birth mother's going to think they're not parenting properly and want the baby back. So um, they don't understand uh, birth parents, especially birth women's psyche. They have made a huge decision to place their baby for adoption, and they've had to go through a lot of grief and loss to let the baby go. And once they've gone through that, and the baby's settled in a home, they're not going to do anything for the most part. I mean, there's always the exception, but for the most part in my career, they're not going to do anything to disrupt that. So, a lot of fear, a lot of myths that needed to be straightened out. Um, and then they worry about what we call the birth bond, because there is a bond between children and their, especially their mother. And I noticed it. This was when my middle son was about 14, and we have a lot of relatives in Florida, and he'd never met them. So we had a vacation there, and they had like a little family reunion, and my children were there. And Michael came to me and he said, "Mom, I can't get over this. Uh, I feel so comfortable with all these people. I can talk to them immediately." And I said, "Yeah, well, that's the birth bond right there." Um, you know, so people are afraid of that. They're afraid to have the child around the mother, afraid that suddenly this child, when the child's older, is just going to say, "Oh, I feel better over here," and leave. But that doesn't happen either.
So, I guess for anyone who's listening and watching who maybe doesn't know what open adoption is, like what does it actually look like when two families agree to it?
Well, I can tell you what they have in common. Open adoption is a kind of family formation. It's like blended families, same sex families. It's a kind of family formation. Um, and it's where the birth parents and adoptive parents have agreed that it's important for the child to have contact with his or her birth parents and birth relatives. It's not just the birth parents, birth relatives. So it's family preservation, what it is, family preservation. So that's it. And then from there, who knows? Because when you look at, well, for example, take a look at marriages. Right? And people, you have 5 couples in a room, they all say they're married. And you talk to them and you realize their marriages are not the same. Hmm?
Mm-hmm.
Not, no way. And it's like that in open adoption. So some people in open adoption for them is that they have certainly they know each other's identity. They know each other where they live. They've been usually in each other's home. But then how they maintain that contact, it differs. And so some will get together once a year and maintain contact by email or Zoom or something like that. Other people, it's like they've moved in together almost. Like they vacation together and they socialize together. Um, one adoptive mom had been at the birth of her first child, and then after she adopted a child, she became pregnant, and she asked the birth mother to be present at her birth.
Wow. So it leads to some very close bonds. I'd never really heard it described that way, like how you said it's just a different kind of family formation, and it sounds like it really can be a beautiful thing of two families coming together.
It can be. Or it can be a nightmare. If you have relationship problems, you're not suddenly going to have relationship problems with everybody else in your life and have a wonderful relationship with a birth parent or adoptive parents. You bring a set of skills with you. So open adoption isn't for everybody. Not everybody can do it or do it well.
And it
Mm.
sounds like it can look different too in any situation, like the amount of time you agree to spend together, for example,
Mhm.
or like how often the child might see their birth parents. So there
Mhm.
is some flexibility, but I guess the foundation of open adoption is that the birth parents are part of the child's life.
Mhm. And that has a lot of benefits for the child. You do it for the child. You don't do it for the birth mom or birth father or the adoptive parents. You do it for the child. So these adoptees never have to go through search and reunion because their birth family had been part of their life. You know, they never. Adoptees are very good at scanning crowds. I used to watch them. Why when they tend when I go someplace with them, they're always scanning, and I'm thinking, what are they scanning for? Like, well, they're looking for people that look like them. Maybe that's their father. Maybe that's their mother. They're scanners, and that's a kind of anxiety, right there. That's an anxiety thing, and they don't feel like they've been abandoned because they haven't. Their birth parents are still accessible and there for them. Um, they don't feel unloved. Mm. So I think it benefits the child. However, the adoptive parents and birth parents have to do a lot of emotional work to make it work. You know? And that's what parents do. That's what parents do.
Absolutely. I think you've really opened my eyes to this side of things that I had never really heard it before. And I'm sure a lot of people listening and watching this episode will feel the same way. So I guess I wonder in your experience with the adoption system in general, what would you like to see change?
The one thing I'd like to see change is more supports for birth parents going through the adoption process. Right now, what happens in private adoption is if you want to adopt a child or children, you have to take an education course, and it's called PRIDE. And it's an acronym, and I can't remember. I've never remembered what that stands for. Parenting something. But it's an education course, okay? And 27 hours. So you have to take that course. And also, before you can be adoption ready, you have to have a home study, and that usually takes about 3 months to finalize. So you're having 6 or 7 sessions with a social worker. She's assessing your readiness, educating you about adoption. So you look at that, and I would say most adoptions are, adoptive parents who are entering adoption are pretty well educated, right? Birth parents are given um, I think it's 5 pages, info sheet by the government. Then the government says that what they need to do is somebody's coming at my door. Um,
Do you have to go answer it?
I'm hoping they just put something in my mailbox and
Okay.
go, but I'll keep on.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, that's what they did.
Okay, good.
It's election time.
Yes, it's
Uh,
true.
okay, so with birth parents, their education is minimal. They're given every birth parent has to read over this info sheet and initial it and sign it, about 5 pages, and then the government will say it's a good practice to provide a birth parent with some counseling. So okay, you've just you're pregnant and you're going to place a baby for adoption. You're already feeling horrible about yourself, and somebody comes and says, "You need some counseling." what if you present it that way, they'll run. They'll run. They don't want to be. They already know life hasn't turned out the way they expected, and they'll run. So some of them will not engage. But if you approach them and like you did adoptive parents and said, you need to be well educated, you need to know your options, they'd be there. However, and then so they're not. That's so many of them turn down a chance for counseling. And then the other thing is, the government doesn't see any value, or they don't think it's their responsibility to provide counseling or support for or education for birth parents, because this is old time thinking. They're saying we're focused on the child, and the child's going to the adoptive parents, so that's our focus, not the birth mother. But that's old thinking, because we have open adoption now, and they are involved. So when you look at counseling for birth parents, as opposed to adoptive parents who are counseled by somebody who has had 5 years clinical experience in an MSW and knowledge of adoption, as a licensee, I could hire Joe Blow off the street to counsel. No qualifications.
This sounds like a really big gap in the system.
Yes, I would say so. A
Yeah.
huge gap. And it's also a gap that minimizes the value of women.
Just by the nature of the way that you're right. I mean, and of course, if you're a birth parent, a birth mother, you're going to feel that, whether someone tells you or not, just in the nature of here's your 5 pages of information.
You're not worthwhile. That's what it comes across. And they carry that with them, some of them, for the rest of their lives. And that makes me sad. It makes me angry. And and that's why I was willing to come on your podcast, because that's my message.
Well, I'm so thankful that you took this time and, to educate me, the people who are listening. It's just something a topic we don't hear a lot about in the way that I think that you've explained it today. And I wonder, does any of what you were just saying is any of that connected to the book that you're writing?
Well, yes, it is. And I'm telling you, I must thank you for this, because I was feeling like, I'm in the stages of retiring. And when you tell people that you work with it, you're retiring, they close the door even before you've got both feet out, you know?
That's
Oh, goodbye.
unfortunate.
You mean you're still here? Um, uh, so I was beginning to feel like I've been writing notes and putting things together for about 10 years. I've got a chest with about 400 pages typed in there, but never edit. I never do anything with it. I just add to it. And then you and Ryan called about this, and I thought, wow, if they're interested, maybe other people would be interested in that too. So it's motivated me, and I've been working on it. So thank you. And the and I realize I have enough material really for 2 books. So I'm now putting them in pile A and pile B. So pile A is about how to build and maintain an open adoption relationship. So it's more social worky type of stuff. The other one is I like to paint. So I've got this beautiful painting of a daisy with the petal falling off, and I've named it She Loves Me, She Loves Me Not. And it's the relationship between birth mothers and adoptive mothers.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Wow.
It's
And
a relationship about women, and about how they can support each other, and they can even love each other. I love this. So, although I probably have more written about the first one, I may just do the second one first. I don't know. I love it.
Yes, I mean, and with all of your experience and all of the people that you've worked with, it's you just obviously have this wealth of information, and I'm so happy to hear that you're going to move forward and write the books. You will have to keep in touch with us. We'd
I
love to.
will, because you're
Yes,
a motivating force, let me tell you.
yeah. Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. Yeah, please do keep us posted. And just before we end, I want to go back to your turning point here because we talked at the beginning about how you'd been a teacher for 10 years. You decided to change course to counseling, and it's sort of this serendipitous thing that happened that you got this position working in the adoption space. You obviously, that wasn't your kind of trajectory when you started counseling. So what would you say you're most proud of as you reflect back on your career?
Well, I think bringing the idea of open adoption and sharing it with others from Texas to Toronto was a big thing, right? Yes. And continuing to do it, especially with the initial reaction was not very positive. So I'm proud of that. But really, what I I take the most joy in really is seeing the families, and mm, they help each other. You see, the birth mothers help provide adoptive parents for the family, but these adoptive parents provide the birth mothers with a sense of value and worth, and if it's going well, with love. So it's it's magic moments right there. So I like that.
And your work has obviously influenced so many lives and created so many families. So it sounds like when things go well like this, it's incredibly rewarding. And I'm just so grateful to you for kind of opening our eyes to this experience and to the work that you do and that you have done throughout the course of your career. So thank you again for coming here and for sharing your story with us.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it was really great to have you, Jennie. And thank you to all of you for listening and watching today. If you're enjoying the show, please leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. You can also follow the show on YouTube, and you can find me on social media at Priya Sam. If you're interested in learning more about the work that Jennie does, we're also going to link to her website in the show notes. Until next time, take good care of yourselves and of each other.